The views and opinions expressed on the show are those of the guests or hosts, and not necessarily those of the advertisers, networks, platforms, or stations. Warning that the content of the show may not be suitable for all audiences, and that viewer discretion is advised. The show does not intend to provide medical, legal, or financial advice, and viewers or listeners should consult with a professional before making any decisions based on the information presented.
Welcome back, everybody, to Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio Live. I'm your host, Jack Carey, and we are broadcasting from 300 feet deep in an abandoned nuclear missile silo somewhere lost in the post-apocalyptic wastelands of the Dakota Territories. And, you know, today, above us, we saw, or rather heard, Three-Eye Atlas. It was coming in. Yep, that's right. That's Three-Eye Atlas. It was coming in for a hard landing, and that's my new theory. My new theory is that Three-Eye Atlas is actually the Sanford and Son junk truck of our galactic neighborhood, and that's what it's doing out there. It's, you know, it's got one wheel that's kind of wobbly, and it's missing some hubcaps, and it's looking rough even for a galactic ghetto sled at this stage. Which is funny. That takes us into our main topic tonight, which is all of this new revolutionary, however you want to say it, knowledge that's coming down to us from a guy that Corbell and Knapp have interviewed lately, and that would be the Dr. Lukasik, the guy that was in charge of the Pentagon's UFO program once upon a time. And boy, did he have a lot to say. He had a lot not to say, which told us even more. And I think you're going to find a lot of what he had to lay on the public through this interview to be, well, disturbing in some ways, maybe not so disturbing in others. Maybe a few things he said kind of lead us to believe that maybe there's not a big threat from this phenomenon. But I can tell you from what he said, which was confirmatory of all of the things that were published in the book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, really, his testimony corroborating things like the hitchhiker effect, things like the fact that, yes, there's a nuts and bolts component to the UFO phenomenon. There is. But there's also a whole other aspect to it, which is paranormal in nature, and we're going to try to wrap our brain around that this evening. I'm joined, as always, by the paranormal crime-fighting duo. Daisy and the Sundance Kid are working security in the silo tonight. As always, it is a $10 cover charge and a 2-drink minimum. And you have to be kind to your waitress or your doodle. Daisy, come here to me. I want to show everybody what my security looks like in the silo tonight. And here she is. This is Daisy. This is Miss Daisy. Yeah, all right. Yep, she is the main security in the silo. She and the Sundance Kid, and she didn't know what to think about Three-Eye Atlas coming in with the Sanford and Son blasting today, but she was all in. She thought that sounded like a party. So we're going to be discussing also our ongoing segments, which are cryptocurrencies and the fact that we were led here by the cyber prophecies. That's right. The cyber prophecies are really a combination of both the webbot and all of our intelligence streams that come in here on the show, which I refer to as the Shazbot. And together they make up our cyber prophecies. That's a culmination of all kinds of cool stuff thrown in there, like Vedic astrology and ancient history and prophecies and things like that. And the webbot, you know, for a long time it was saying 3i Atlas is it was predicting the language that was going to come out about 3i Atlas. And the language has been absolutely hilarious. If you've been watching mainstream media online cover it, because the networks are just, that's a lost cause. You can forget that. But online, let me see if I can get a better camera feed here. They have been talking about the fact that 3i Atlas is, you know, potentially an alien craft. That was A.V. Loeb, the professor over at Harvard, that was telling everybody that. And, you know, the webbot seemed to confirm a lot of that, but you also have to realize that the webbot is a language predictor. It predicts what language will show up all over the world at that time. And right now, that language is, this is an alien craft. And with it comes a certain amount of ontological shock, because you've had a lot of people kind of go haywire ever since it's been announced, and now it's a big to-do online, all of that stuff going on. Sorry, I'm kind of messing around with the new camera tonight, so you'll have to bear with me here. Maybe that's the best. But, interesting week in cryptocurrency. Kind of catch everybody up on that scene. First of all, the cyber prophecies, the webbot, the future forecasting group, a lot of other intelligence streams led us into the cryptocurrency scene, and that's where I spend most of my time these days, for very good reason. And what can I say? You're in the transitional period right now of a time when you're going to have one system completely replaced by a new system, which is digitized tokens. They call them tokens, but that's just an easy way of classifying a digital asset. So I mainly trade Ethereum. Bitcoin's great, but I don't find that the swings up and down are as tradable as you find in Ethereum right now. So, sorry, I've got a dry throat. I've been talking all day long. So, anyway, the cryptocurrency markets and the cyber prophecies have converged to this point and place in time. And if you're part of my listenership out there, then you've been along for this ride. Hopefully, you're able to kind of also partake in and not be too scared of just investigating cryptocurrencies, right? Reading everything you can about them and stuff like that. That'll be the best way to prepare for what's coming. If you're not actively in the crypto markets, and I'm not a financial analyst, I am a paranormal analyst, and I give out intelligence reports, and it just so happens that the paranormal crossed over into the financial quite a ways ago, and there's really no way to cover one without covering the other now, because of the cyber prophecies and because of the fact that a lot of the transition that you're going to see in our economy is caused by the concealment of alien technology behind the scenes. It's really that simple. So, you know, the webbot predicted there would be a time when you would have nonstop leakages from the disclosure movement. And truth be told, we've reached that point. You're never going to have a floodgate moment. I'm convinced of that, where the floodgates just open and everything comes out. And you probably don't want it that way, because that would cause such widespread societal disruption that it would probably produce a point of negative returns, and we don't need that in our society. It's already precarious enough. And so really the best thing for humanity at this stage is to see a slow disclosure take place along with that technology being introduced into the public. Now, this Dr. Lukasik, he basically is saying that disclosure is happening. Maybe not in quite the way people want it to occur, but it is happening, and it's happening, he says, primarily because the aerospace companies that have been back engineering some of this technology have come to a point where they now want to profit off of that technology. There's no way for them to explain the gap between us rubbing two sticks together to start a fire and their new magical technology, as they call it. There's nothing in between there to explain how they got it, and they know it, and they know there's no way to explain it. And so they're like, to the government, they're saying, guys, we gotta tell them where this is coming from if we're gonna ever actually introduce it commercially and be able to sell it. That is the end goal. If you can't do that, you can never profit from it. And let me tell you, these companies want to profit from it. They are the ones who are actively now pushing disclosure. And that came right from the horse's mouth himself. That came right from the guy that he was the man behind the man behind the man, if you know what I'm saying. So, Dr. Lukasik, he confirmed a lot of interesting stuff. Chief among those was the fact that the Skinwalker Ranch is truly the most bizarre place on the planet. But he said they had investigators from their UFO program out all over the Uinta Basin, not just on that ranch. And all over the Uinta Basin, the people had non-stop stories of cryptid encounters, weird lights, ghost activity, the paranormal gambit. It ran the paranormal gambit. One of the cases he detailed was a family that had this stick man entity that would come out of the wall. This was near the ranch, but not on the ranch, and it would like walk up behind people that were seated at the table and just look over their shoulder. Did it time and time and time again. Never messed with anything. They said they weren't scared of it other than looking up and seeing a stick figure standing there. But it just seemed curious, right? Such is the way of this phenomenon. And he said that there were paranormal effects, just like they talked about in Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, that were like the hitchhiker effect, and people that had paranormal encounters at Skinwalker Ranch and went back to Maryland and Virginia, and these were intelligence agents. All of them suffered vast paranormal activity. And basically he said, look, you cannot separate this phenomenon, the nuts and bolts craft, from the paranormal phenomenon that seems to accompany that. How do you wrap your brain around that? Because this is the scenario, right? He said that this technology, and I'm highly paraphrasing the entire thing. If you want to watch the interview, you can do it on Corbell's YouTube channel. But he basically says that this technology exhibits apotheum effects. In other words, apotheum effects are effects that alter reality around you. In other words, there's a way in this material that some life form has figured out that you can literally construct, take the elemental dust of the material, right, and manipulate that and construct it in such a way as to produce a machine that can literally alter the fabric of that material itself. That's what you're talking about. And not only that, but the machine, which is the craft, which is what we call a UFO, is sentient. Think about that. It has its own intelligence. Boy, does that change the scope of the entire argument. And he basically makes the statement, now you try to reproduce that. People think that we have all this stuff. Like, you know, what is it, Solar Warden and the 20 in back program and all of these exotic paranormal theories out there. That doesn't look like any of that's going to hold water, guys. It looks like all of that originated from misinformation campaigns by intelligence officers dealing with the UFO phenomenon and have embedded themselves in the ufology community. All of that is one big mirage from the truth. And the truth is they were able to obtain, and it really doesn't matter in what way they obtained it at this stage, whether it was by a crash or whether by an alien gave them one, they obtained a machine that can literally alter the fabric of our reality. And it can do so only through psionic connection with a user. In other words, a psychic connection between the mind of the pilot, let's say, or the user, and the living machine itself. That's how advanced it is. Now, if you were McDonnell Douglas or Raytheon or Lockheed Martin, how would you begin to replicate a living entity that is nuts and bolts? Because that's what it is. And they've been able to make craft that kind of look like it, but they can't make craft that psionically operate like that operates, and they can't make a craft that has that kind of sentient artificial intelligence governing it. All of that is still way beyond their capability. Way beyond. And now they got some really exotic toys. He admits to that. So, you know, that's kind of the situation we're in right now with disclosure. Disclosure is coming, but it's not what anybody thinks it is. And what do you do with a machine which is a world beater? Let's face it, you can replicate something like that if you could even fully control just one of them. You could rule this planet. Don't you think they would have if they could have? Sure they would have. So you're left in a situation where sci-fi world emerging, as the Webbot puts it, is seemingly going to be governed by willful disclosure by the very companies who received handouts of this alien technology from the U.S. military in order to back engineer it, commercialize it, and profit from it. And, hey, I guess that's the American way. So that's really kind of where disclosure is right now. I can tell you some statements made by Marco Rubio, which I mentioned last week, in a new UFO documentary will be world-changing. If they aren't, it's because people don't want to know the truth. I know a lot of people who are scared by the news, won't even watch the news because the news, our mundane news scares them. Imagine how unwilling people like that are to even talk about a subject like this. That's the problem. And, you're facing a huge uphill battle when you talk about UFO disclosure because the vast majority of people on the planet don't want to know about it. It just scares the hell out of them. Period. And so all of this alien technology, this disclosure, this Dr. Lukasik, the 3-Eye Atlas, all of that, believe it or not, is putting pressure on the bubble that humanity is in, and that bubble will burst at some point, and with that you get all kinds of radical change that takes place. And the main thing of that is financial systems change completely to accommodate new technologies, new power systems, new ways of thinking, things like that. And that's what leads us into the cryptocurrency market. So you might say we got here through a completely paranormal rabbit hole, and it's an interesting market. I came to the cryptocurrency market by way of many years of having traded the dot-coms way back when there was a huge bubble in the NASDAQ, and I've lived through all of that and the bubble bursting and all of that, and then the many years where traders couldn't really make much of a living in the market. And now it's back to really kind of the old days. Now you have a completely new asset class. That asset class is being actively purchased by financial institutions on behalf of clients, both in the 401k world and just the investment retail world. And most of them are in the form of electronically traded funds. And that right now, for the first time in cryptocurrency history, is providing a backdrop of buying. So these institutions are in accumulation phase. And what you've been seeing the last couple of weeks is vast amounts of selling from early holders of these cryptocurrencies that bought them really early on and have held them for 10 years, and now they're sitting on huge profits, millions and millions of dollars, and they're wanting to cash out on some of that. That's the selling pressure you're seeing right now. As that's occurring, the institutions are coming in underneath them, and they're picking up those shares. They're not stocks. They're picking up those Bitcoin or the Ethereum tokens, millions and millions and millions of them at a time. They are selling stock in order to raise the money, in order to buy the underlying cryptocurrency. And with that, you get stocks like Bitmine Immersion, which we're going to talk about after the break, because Bitmine Immersion is an Ethereum treasury company. And we're going to talk about what Ethereum is and why it's important, and why an Ethereum treasury company headed up by one of Wall Street's brightest and best, Mr. Tom Lee, is important. Stay with me. We'll get to that right after our break.
I'm Sarah, and this is my story.
I'm Ellen, and this is my story.
One night, I was at a bar. I was having fun with my friends.
I
I had one too many drinks. I got behind the wheel to go home.
I got a cab to go home.
All of a sudden, from out of nowhere, a squirrel ran across the road.
And all of a sudden, from out of nowhere, a squirrel ran across the road.
It happened so quickly, I barely had time to react.
It happened so quickly, the cabbie barely had time to react.
I swerved.
The cab swerved.
I can't believe it. I hit a guy.
I cannot believe it. The cabbie just missed a guy.
I wish I took a cab.
Thank goodness I took a cab.
You have the choice to save a life. Don't drive buzzed. It's a decision you'll never regret. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. Brought to you by the Department of Transportation and the Ad Council.
Bigfoot roams, dogman howls, spaceships fly, portals, slip through, time slip wide, slip through live radio, mystical airwaves, mystical. In the woods, shadows creep, monsters leap. In the woods, strange voices. Shadows creep. In the woods, monsters leap. In the woods, bright noises. Mystical. Airwave mystical. Mystical. UFO. Alien overlord.
From ancient times to modern days, legends of creatures in sudden disarray. Hear them speak through frequencies. Alien connections.
Tune it in, break it out, truth untold. Tune it in, cosmic mystery. Dark woods where legends breathe. Paranormal whispers, can you believe? Bigfoot strikes through the veils. Dogman howls in the midnight tale. From the static, revelations pour. Portals open, dimensions roar. Under starlit skies, echoes of the truth, no disguise. Cryptid shadows creeping near. Through the static, voices clear. Dark woods where legends breathe. Paranormal whispers, can you believe? It's the Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio. Whoa. Wednesday nights, enjoy the show. It's how we spend our Wednesday nights. Yay, yay, yay.
everybody at Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio Live. I'm your host, Jack Carey, your tour guide to the Twilight Zone. I've got a face for milk cartons and a voice for smell-o-vision, and we're talking about another paranormal rabbit hole. This is the one we've been exploring for a while because it's all important and it's happening right now before your eyes. So anyway, back to our discussion, which is paranormal, profiteering the paranormal, which is a term I coined last week. That's really what we're attempting to do with the cryptocurrency market, because it's the paranormal that led us into the cryptocurrency market. And lo and behold, when you take a step back, and I've been doing this lately in analyzing the totality of the intelligence feeds coming into like X on various cryptocurrencies, if you monitor YouTube channels of actual cryptocurrency traders along with financial analysts and precious metals analysts, the way that I do, you know, I've been able to synthesize what's happening right now in the cryptocurrency markets for people that don't have the time to immerse themselves into all of those conversations and stuff that's taking place, and you're wanting to kind of filter through the noise and just understand the basics of what's happening. For the past 10 years or so, the cryptocurrency markets have been ruled by small retail investors. These are usually younger people, Gen Xers, Gen Zers, or whatever. I guess I'm Gen X. I'm not young. So, but the Gen Zers out there, and just retail investors, period, because these things weren't really offered by legitimate stock market entities. Now they are. They have become legitimized in a way they have never been legitimized before. But for the past 10 years, these guys who have been trading these cryptocurrencies have gotten very used to a 4-year cycle. The cryptocurrencies tended to follow this 4-year cycle, up and down and up and down and through what they call the halving cycle. And they could put their money, their chips on the table like clockwork, and it would pay back. Time and time again for the last 10 years they've been doing this, right? This year that didn't work for them. And this year, combined with that not working for them, they had a flash crash right in the middle of their so-called Uptober, which if you, like me, watching all of these traders and their interactions with each other, they were all juiced up that they were going to have this big October, you know, that's when everything was going to just parabolically go up, you know, tenfold, and they were going to all retire, you know. None of that manifested. And because of that, and they had a flash crash, which is when you have too many people borrowing money in order to buy an asset, and all of a sudden they all get margin calls because it moves against them. A margin call is when the brokerage house force sells your position and takes their money back that you borrow, plus a big percentage of yours, because that's what it takes to borrow the money. That's what happened to these dudes. And a lot of them got just decimated. I mean, literally decimated. What's crazy is that the institutions were there, though, right? And they were coming in and they were slowly buying up these shares, which is why you have some stability right now in the cryptocurrency markets. It's these Wall Street institutions with millions and hundreds of millions, and if you're Bitcoin immersion, $13.2 billion worth of Ethereum. are providing now that stability. They're taking all of that from these long-term holders and these retail day traders who were just got decimated, man. I saw one guy on X that lost $30 million in an hour. An entire fortune. Gone. Can you imagine? That's what happens when you borrow. Don't borrow ever. Never, 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 never trade on borrowed money ever. It's not worth it. I know that it is tantalizing. You're sitting there looking at it and you take out your calculator and calculate, well, you got a 10-fold magnification if you borrow that much and it moves your way. You just made 10 times your money back. It moves against you. You are wiped out. It's simple. It's that simple. So just don't do it. It's ridiculous. And there's no reason to do it. Like I said last week, if you were back in 2015, if you had a time machine, if you had a way, way back machine, you could travel back to 2015 and take $1,000 with you and buy some Ethereum and forget you owned it. And you could have woken up this morning and looked at your Ethereum and it would have been worth $3.4 million in 10 years off $1,000. That kind of return simply does not exist in other asset classes, guys, unless you are Paul Pelosi and, Nancy Pelosi, and you can get away with insider trading for 5 decades without the SEC doing anything about it. Right. So you just can't get that kind of return in any other asset class. And so it's interesting that the paranormal, intelligence streams have led us into this area. It's an area of interest for me anyway, so I don't really care. It's something that I would have been doing irregardless, I think. And so it was very interesting to me to see intelligence leading into the markets. So, but back to where we are, these guys, these retail investors are just now, it's November 12th, they're just now sort of in the last throes of vomiting up their cryptocurrency that they can't hold on to, because that's the problem with a lot of these retail investors, is that they invested money they couldn't afford to lose. And then when they didn't get a 10-fold return on it, they needed to sell it in order to pay the rent. Right? That's what you're talking about, because that's the kind of underlying desperation right now in our society. Anything for ROI at any cost, return on investment at any cost, because there is no way to get ahead, period. Cryptocurrencies actually offer a way out of that. They really do. And, Ethereum is the new Wall Street. Just think of it like that. All Wall Street transactions will now, going forward, they are building out as fast as they can humanly build it out on the Ethereum network. The entire Wall Street world will be on the Ethereum network. You think that's going away anytime soon? Because once they build the rails for an entirely new system, they keep those rails for a long time. Just look at the ancient financial system we find ourselves in today, where it takes days and days for a transaction to settle and banks to transfer money. And, oh man, it's just a nightmare when you can do it instantly with a keystroke. Any asset, anytime. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with no transaction cost. Well, there is a slight transaction cost on the Ethereum network for these big institutions that are doing these transactions, but those transaction costs are given back to the Ethereum holders as yield on their money. In other words, Ethereum is a yield-bearing asset that's digital in form. An asset that you never need to, like, you don't have to have tenants. You don't need to really store it. You can have, a lot of people do store them in cold wallets, in personal digital wallets. I trade with mine, so that's not really a practical thing for me, which is okay. There's other ways to insure yourself. But so that's really what we're looking at with the current scenario, right? So the ETFs, institutions are coming in, buying it up. The retail investors are throwing it up because they didn't get their long-awaited October, and now they're all throwing a hissy fit. And all of a sudden, if you look on X, you could see the ones that have lost everything because they're just inconsolable. And it's the end of everything and the end of the world. And it's the end of the cryptocurrency market. And nothing's good. And, that's that whole thing. That's how you know you're at a bottom. Not a top, right? You're at the bottom when you start seeing that kind of stuff. So it's interesting that the cyber prophecies led us here, but the cyber prophecies have also talked about the alien presence, the fact that going forward we're going to have this alien technology coming out, and it seems to point to the idea that they're going to be sneaky about it. So they're going to basically take 0-point energy type generators and begin to slowly employ them into the national power feed, power grid, and without really saying anything about it, because they don't really know what to say about it, right? While these big aerospace companies are pushing for disclosure, they're left with trying to just get this stuff implemented in a way that won't implode society, but will benefit it instead. How do you introduce technology to a species which in and of itself would produce maybe fatal ontological shock if it were ever realized where it originated from? That's a pretty good question, isn't it? How do you back engineer alien technology and then introduce it into the public in such a way that you don't scare them out of their belief system? That's a better way to put it. Because when you scare them out of their belief system, they just act like a herd, and all of a sudden you get a stampede. You can't do that. It doesn't do anybody any good. So, so you see what I'm getting at, right? Here's a technology which its very existence should cause fatal ontological shock in our species, because we have, wrapped ourselves around in these belief systems which don't include the possibility of that existing. So obviously that pops the bubble of the belief system, and with it you have ontological shock take place. You have people just quit everything because they don't find meaning in it anymore. Same thing has happened in ancient civilizations for their entire history of humanity. When the people lose belief in the existing power structure, which is often governed by a god, which is the deity of that particular culture's religion, and that fails them, they quit everything. And they even walked away from their cities in South America. Vast cities, they just threw up their hands and said, no, can't do it. So that is where you're at, really. And that is a tight wire walk. What if you were the people that were running this whole program for all this many decades, knowing all of this, right? How do you begin to even disclose something like that? And so, there's right and there's wrong and there's secret and there's things that shouldn't be kept from the public, obviously, but it's understandable to see how humanity has gotten into this particular situation. And what else did Lukasik say? It was very interesting because he gave us a little glimpse into why disclosure also is so difficult. And part of that glimpse was the fact that here's a guy who was the guy, right? He's the guy you think of like in the X-Files. He was running the X-Files, this guy. And even he was so compartmentalized within the program that he only got to study the nuts and bolts aspect of the phenomenon. He was aware that there were others studying the paranormal aspects of the phenomenon, the ill health effects caused to humans by the phenomenon, but his particular little corner of the program was just the nuts and bolts part of it. So he couldn't really speak to the idea of, do we have alien buddies? That wasn't part of his little corner of the program. He couldn't really speak to whether or not the craft was given to us or we recovered it from a crash. That wasn't his part of the program. That's how compartmentalized it is. His part of the program was looking at the actual nuts and bolts technology of the alien craft itself. Right. And there again, I have to retouch on that idea. There is a way to take what already exists within this materium to manipulate it in ways that we can create different kinds of materials which can interact with one another in such a way as to literally bend or alter the fabric of reality itself. That is what governs this alien technology that they have acquired. That's huge, right? But there's this whole other part of it, which is the paranormal part of it. And this Lukasik guy, he actually had a Men in Black and scenario take place. The Men in Black always show up in the weirdest, little scenarios, and he was aware of them. And he had a Men in Black scenario take place on a subway train. Interestingly enough, an empty subway train, a woman sits down right next to him, opens up a big newspaper, and he's like, well, who reads a newspaper? Just spreads it out where it's almost in his face, kind of like that right next to him. And in a second, he kind of glances over and he looks and he gets a double take. And right there, just as big as can be on one of the pages, is a man in black. The whole wearing the hat and the suit, and he's got the shiny black shoes on, and he's holding a sign, right? And the sign says, "Join us." How weird is that? She made sure he saw it, waited till the next stop, stood up, and got off. That's the kind of bizarro stuff we're talking about, right? And he's thinking in his head, what the, if there were a counterintelligence operation involving some so-called men in black, he's thinking in his head, I'm the guy that would have sent them. So what is this all about? Who are these people? It doesn't make any sense, right? That is the apotheum effect of the phenomenon itself. how weird. It can exhibit weird stuff like that. And yet, there's a whole nuts and bolts component to this whole thing. He mentioned a few very interesting cases. One of them that have never been published, never been talked about before. One of them was in Georgia. This will remind you not to shine flashlights or spotlights at UFOs. Just don't do it. A gentleman in Georgia shined a 1 million candle power spotlight at a low hovering UFO. It immediately shot back a beam of highly ionized radiation and gave him tumors all over his body. That's one of their cases. In another case, there were 3 teenagers and a policeman. I believe this was in Kentucky or Kansas. And they all witnessed a low-flying, gigantic black triangle, which was photographed. He claims the photograph that you do see out there online from that encounter is the real photograph. And it was noted that this black triangle had like 100 so-called Christmas lights on it. Lights that were just seemed to be have no real use, no real utility. They seem to be like cosmetic on this craft. And all 4 witnesses are thinking to themselves, why would a top secret government UFO have 100 Christmas lights on it? Wouldn't it just give it away no matter what? Why would you do that? And that brings up this whole conversation that Lukasik has with Corbell and Knapp about UFO shapes and what that means for the phenomenon itself. Why are there so many different kinds and shapes of UFOs? Do they infer utility, different kinds of jobs that they're performing? Are they indicative of different kinds of non-human intelligences? Does it mean something else entirely? They don't know. They simply do not know. So Lukasik is yet another in a long line of these people that are coming out of these legacy special access programs that are beginning to tell their tale. They're doing it as quickly as they can. With their security clearances, he had to actually get all of the content from the 2 books he's released, and yes, they're out there on Amazon. Look them up. From the Pentagon, he had to get permission. And he's like, he explains what the difference is. The difference is, if you were talking about like nuclear weapons, the difference is acknowledging that nuclear weapon, it's a difference between acknowledging a nuclear weapon exists and having the schematics and the fuel for it. Right? And that's the difference. What the Pentagon and the military don't want, they don't care about you knowing about the concept that a alien ship exists. But anything having to do with how it operates, anything having to do with the nature of the material it's made of, stuff like that, that is a strict no-go. Because you have China and Russia just foaming at the mouth to take us down any way, shape, or form that they can. And that's what they're worried about. So going forward, we're going to see some really interesting stuff take place, guys. The cryptocurrency markets are just warming up, and I would encourage you to start looking at them as something that might help you out. So join me next week. We will tackle another crazy rabbit hole. It's called the Fouquet Letter. I'll leave you with that. Look it up.